So to continue my series I've been doing about the current state of North American Counter-Strike, I'll be using this third portion to talk about one of the new rising teams in the NA scene, which is going to be CLG, Counterlogic Gaming, formerly known as Mousepaz, and some people still refer to them that way. Um, Now, this is a team that really started to gain some notoriety, obviously, because they are going to be one of the North American representatives at the first major of 2015 in Katowice via the offline qualifier that they competed in very recently. Now, this will be actually the first time that there is a new team from NA going to a major. In the past, it's always just been different iterations of the core players from teams like Complexity and Cloud9 or EnvyUs. So this is kind of now some new blood from NA having a chance to represent the continent at one of the Valve 250K majors. So this is obviously why they're very famous, and also famous just for being one of the first teams to receive one of these very big sponsorships from some of these top North American organizations. Obviously, Cloud9 and EnvyUs and Curse were some of the first orgs, and Complexity were some of the first orgs to step in, but now we're starting to see teams that are orgs that have never had Counter-Strike teams before kind of step in, known for being like League of Legends teams or something like that, actually stepping into Counter-Strike, so they're famous for that as well. Now, I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time talking about the history of the team and all the players, but I actually did an interview with Finesse a long time ago on one of my episodes in the Hype. I think he was one of the first 5 episodes that I did. So if you want like a deeper history of Mousepaz and of Finesse, you can definitely kind of go take a look at that if you want to. But what I will tell you is that Finesse and Cutler on this team have been, teammates since the beginnings of the game in 2012. They've always kind of stuck together. Hayes has been on the team for a year now. He joined in February of 2014, so he's been on the team for a good amount of time now as well. I think Tarek joined the team back in July of 2014, so he's been on the team, not quite a year, but he's definitely been on the team for a decent amount of time now. And Peter, of course, is their newest addition, just joining in December of last year, so a very, fresh player to the team. Now, saying that I won't talk about the history, I'll at least tell you that Mousepaz has always been known as a team that's been slowly progressing. Back in the early days, in late 2012, they weren't really challenging very much in the NA scene. They weren't really making it to the playoffs for ESEA or CEVO. They were having kind of average or mediocre records in the regular seasons of their competitive play in North American leagues. But eventually they did start making it to some of the ESEA LAN events. They made it to the season 15 and season 16 ESEA LANs. In the first one, they definitely kind of struggled getting beat by a European team and also by EnvyUs to get eliminated from the event. And EnvyUs was kind of their kryptonite for the longest time on LAN and online. You look at the CEVO Season 5 event, for example, they lost to EnvyUs twice in that event, though it was much closer than whenever they had played them in a previous ESEA LAN. So they were definitely getting better. They were challenging EnvyUs a bit better, at least, and the latter LANs they were playing them against versus the earlier events in ESEA. Then at the Season 16 ESEA LAN event that they qualified for, they basically got destroyed by Virtus Pro in the upper bracket, went on to eliminate Overgaming from the tournament, but then got beat by Navi in the lower bracket. So essentially, for the longest time, this team was just kind of struggling to compete with their North American rivals, though they were steadily getting better. And of course, they weren't really challenging European teams at all whenever they faced them at the ESEA events. But they started to build some hype around themselves and gain some traction whenever they were playing in the online qualifiers for X Games Aspen. And the reason for this is because they actually finally beat EnvyUs, or they weren't EnvyUs, they weren't called that at the time. I think they had already dropped that sponsorship and they were called GX or something like that. But it was the same players from EnvyUs plus Hiko, who was being like a stand-in at the time after kind of leaving Cloud9. So kind of shocked everyone that they were able to beat EnvyUs finally and in a best of 3, which was, I know it's online, but that's still a pretty good accomplishment to beat EnvyUs in a best of 3, especially for them since they had always struggled against them in the past. So it was kind of, once again, further evidence that they were developing and they were finally, becoming a challenger in the NA scene. And they also beat Torqued, I think, in the finals of that qualifier to be the first team NA to qualify for Aspen since Cloud9 was already directly invited. So this was huge because everyone thought that the EnvyUs group would be the first team to qualify, and then after that, in the second qualifier, it would be teams like Mousepaz, like Denial, which is now Liquid, like Torqued, and some of these other top NA teams would be challenging for a second spot, and most people didn't really know who would get the second spot. I think some people thought it would be Denial, some people thought it would be Torqued, but I think Mousepads wasn't even a favorite in most people's eyes to make it out of the second qualifier. So for them to do so well in the first and be the first team to qualify, this was certainly a good accomplishment for them, and it really started building up a lot of hype around them. To add to this hype, they were doing really well on some of these other online cups from Face It. I think they also did another online cup for like the Hitbox Arena guys or something like that. So they were having these pretty good performances online around this time as well. I think they beat Torque in a best of 5 or something like that, 3-0 in some online cup they were doing as well. So they were really starting to kind of build some traction and defeat some top NA teams and really kind of establish themselves as being somewhere up there. You know, obviously maybe not past Cloud9, even though Cloud9 was starting to struggle a bit at the end of the year, right? So people were starting even to maybe hype this team over to Cloud9, though I think that was a bit too soon to say something like that at the time. So basically, slowly progressing. Aspen qualifiers, they look really good. Some of these online cups and within the NA scene, they're looking really good. They're looking to be one of the top 3 teams in NA now all of a sudden after, you know, years of slow progression or a couple of years of just slowly working their way up. So then whenever they go to the actual Aspen LAN, now they were in the group with Liquid, LDLC, and Fnatic. And so everyone kind of thought that, you know, Fnatic and LDLC should make it out this group no problem. Yeah, sure, the match between CLG and Liquid might be interesting just to see, like, who is actually better on LAN in regards to NA rankings. But, you know, no one really gave this team any credit to have any type of chance. They had never challenged European teams in the past. And, yeah, they have a different roster now, but just the history didn't show that they could really challenge against, you know, EU teams, especially at this point, LDLC and Fnatic being the top 2 teams in the world. So there really wasn't much to go off of to be able to predict CLG to have much of a chance. But they go into the event and they shock everyone. They beat LDLC on Dust 2, close 16-14 game. Peter plays out of his mind with the op. I think he dropped over 30 kills. I remember famously to win the game when the score was 15-14 in favor of CLG. He had this crazy triple kill with the op at the B-bomb site with 1 HP that won him the game 16-14, and throughout the game he had played very well. And it wasn't as if the other people were doing poorly or something. They actually played pretty well too, but he was just definitely kind of the star of the game. There's no question about it. Now, when they interviewed Peter afterwards, they were kind of trying to figure out, you know, why is CLG so successful in this game? And obviously Peter playing so well was part of it, but Peter also cites that Finesse, their endgame leader, had spent quite a lot of time scouting LDLC just because they knew that this was probably their best chance to upset one of the 2 European teams out of their group. And then they figure, you know, once we can upset one of the European teams, then we just have to beat Liquid, and then, you know, we should actually be able to advance out of the group with the second seed or something. So they were really focused in on LDLC. They were scouting their demos. They were watching how they played. From what I understand, from what Peter said, Finesse really did understand how LDLC played their CT side Dust 2. He knew exactly how they would position themselves for mid to B attacks and exactly their timings on their rotation. So he spent a fair amount of time really just scouting this team very heavily, whereas LDLC probably had very little information at all on CLG. In fact, I doubt they saw anything from them unless they did happen to watch the Aspen qualifiers or something, but it's very likely LDLC had nothing to go off of when it came to CLG, whereas CLG had almost all the information in the world about how LDLC played. So I'm sure that definitely helped, but they also played pretty well fragging-wise, and they get the big upset. So, you know, this hype they had brought with them from their online results are now coming to them at LAN as well, and they're looking really good in this event. And then they get absolutely smashed by Liquid. I think it was 16-3 or 16-2 on Cash. Just absolutely crushed. And this pretty much kills their chances of making out of groups because they already had this amazing feat of upsetting LDLC in their first game. So now all they have to do is just kind of take care of Liquid, the North American team who was like a last-minute replacement team for the XI by Power who weren't going to be able to go because of all the Valve bans. And so Liquid kind of got brought in last minute with very little preparations. And it seemed like, okay, now that CLG's beaten LDLC, as long as they can just take care of Liquid, they should advance to the second seed with you know, Fnatic and LDLC duking it out for that next spot. And that was just all but the case. They get smashed by Liquid out of nowhere on Cash. They can't get anything going on T side. Liquid just absolutely crushes them from their CT side. I know Cash is generally pretty CT sided, but I mean they just got obliterated. Didn't even have a chance. And then they go on to lose to Fnatic on Mirage. It wasn't like a complete blowout game, but you know they never were. Fnatic was never at risk of losing, is my point. So they get eliminated from X Games with kind of a disappointing finish. It wasn't a disappointing finish if you had not knowing what happened. Like, for example, if you had just known, oh, I know CLG's going to Aspen, they should get eliminated in group play because they're playing against Fnatic and LDLC, and then you get the end result, which is they get eliminated from Aspen in group play, you'd be like, oh, no real surprise there. They had to play against Fnatic and LDLC. They didn't really have much of a shot. This should be kind of a no-brainer. But the fact that they were able to beat LDLC on Dust 2, I mean, that should have opened them up to advance. It just really had to just take care of Liquid, and they couldn't do it. And this kind of opens up the door for talk about their streaky or inconsistent play that they have. And we'll kind of come back to that topic a bit later. As they go on the ClutchCon the very next weekend, and in group play, they dominate, and no real surprise here. But then they go in the quarterfinals, and they lose to Elevate in a 2-1 series. And Elevate, they're a pretty good team in North America within the NA scene. They're probably, a top 5 NA team. So it's not as if Elevate's like horribly ranked below CLG and it's like a crazy upset based on rankings. But with CLG having that big win against LDLC at X Games Aspen, and how well CLG had been playing against some of these North American teams online, coming into these big LAN events, and they have this big title sponsor, they're trying to work themselves into like being a top 3 NA team. You expect them to be able to at least make it to the semifinals against a team like Cloud9, and from there, yeah, there's a chance they might get beat at that point, but then it wouldn't be disappointing because Cloud9 was kind of ranked above them. But, I mean, they get eliminated by Elevate, so this is once again kind of a sign of their streaky play where they can play really well in this one particular instance against a really good team, but then against teams that you think they should be able to beat, they don't perform, so to speak. And this kind of, once again, just adds to these issues of inconsistency. Now, I understand that at ClutchCon, there were some kind of outside issues that affected their play. I know a lot of them were very ill, very sick, but I also know that some of them were just lacked discipline and how long they kind of stayed up the night before their quarterfinals match against Elevate. I think it really did boil down to a situation where they really just underestimated Elevate. So, like in high-pressure situations where they know they have to perform, they know they have to be prepared, they know they have to be on top of their game, they seem to handle that pretty well. But whenever it's against teams that they feel they should beat easily, or where they just kind of feel lax, like they don't really need to put forth crazy amounts of effort or prep because it's a team they should have no problem with, that's whenever they really seem to suffer. And this is something that Hayes even said when I've talked to him. He says, we know we're inconsistent. We know we're kind of sometimes a 50-50 team, and it's really because we do kind of approach our games online and against underdogs a little bit too laxed, whereas underneath, these higher pressure situations where they're the underdog, they seem to kind of thrive on that. And maybe not thrive, but they put more time and more effort, the appropriate amount of effort in those situations, whereas against teams they maybe feel they should edge out very easily, they don't maybe put enough effort. So they have these inconsistency issues, but they go into the Katowice qualifiers with Liquid and C9 to try to get some slots for NA in this event. And at the Katowice qualifiers, once again, they come up with a really big win against a top team on Dust 2. And it's going to be Titan this time, which is kind of a top 6 team in the world. I know they've been struggling a bit recently, but they're still definitely in the top 10, probably more towards the top 6. And so this is another really big win for CLG against, an elite European team. And then after that, they're able to win a really close game against Gamers 2, which is like the second best team from Poland behind Virtus Pro, so that they're able to get this game here as well on cash. Very close game. Now, I will say in both these games, they had really big leads that they kind of given up. So that is kind of a sign, once again, of maybe a little bit of inconsistency. They're able to get a big lead, but then they kind of let it slip for a long time before they close the game. And that can be something that could be very dangerous for them going forward if they continue that trend. But the point is they got the business done. They won both their games, and they advance to go into the main event in Katowice of 2015. So what are we left with then with CLG? What are we to believe? We've seen them have these big wins against good teams, which were definitely shocking and upsets based on CLG's past against European teams. But it's also a sign that their slow progression still seems to be kind of progressing. Maybe it's not sustainable, but they're definitely getting better. Now they're, challenging NA teams like iBuyPower. They were challenging teams like iBuyPower before that team died online, whereas in the past they couldn't. At ESCA LAN events against European teams, they were just getting destroyed, whereas now they're actually winning maps against teams like Titan and LDLC, now EnvyUs, and then even against Fnatic at ClutchCon, they were at least able to get like a close map score, like not getting completely blown out. So there definitely does seem to be some progression that has been made by this team. But there's definitely big inconsistency issues where they somehow beat teams most people think they have no business being able to beat. Then they lose to teams that most people would think that they should have no problem with. Or, in the very least, maybe not have no problem with, because it's not, like I said, like Liquid or Elevate are ranked so far below CLG that CLG should just be able to crush them. But you figure if you're beating these elite level teams, then you should be capable of beating your North American teams that are ranked below you by most people's standards, yet they seem to have slipped up in regards to that. Now, some other things to be concerned with about this team is, from what I understand, Finesse is no longer the in-game leader for this team. Apparently, Peter will be taking up that position, their opper. This is concerning just because Finesse has never really been known to be a big fragger for this team. Not that he's, awful or something like that. I mean, he actually played pretty good at the Katowice qualifiers. I think against Titan on Dust 2, he was either their top fragger or second best fragger or something like that. So it's not as if he can't frag, but that's never really been his main role. His main role has always been an in-game leader. And from what I understand, from watching the games and from listening to these players' interviews, he really does do a good job of preparing and scouting these teams and getting his team prepared to know how to play against their style and stuff like that. And so if he's stepping away from the role where he seems to have had his biggest impact for the team's success, that's a little bit questionable. I'm not really sure what the deal is here. Apparently he's going to be kind of more of a lurker support player now. And apparently he'll help with Peter with in-game leading, I'm sure, like mid-round or something like that. He might make calls or adjustments. But apparently it's going to be Peter who will be the main in-game leader. So this just seems a bit weird to me because I feel like that was Finesse's biggest contribution to the team. Not because he can't frag at all, but just because he's never really been known to have a reputation of being one of their heavier fraggers. And like I said, the in-game leading role is where he seemed to have the biggest impact on the team. So to step away from that seems a bit odd to me. We'll just have to see how it goes, I suppose. Another thing to talk about is Peter's op. I mean, this was one of the big reasons why they had so much success against LDLC on Dust 2. You have to kind of wonder how much weight is really put on that one thing. I mean, is he going to be expected to be kind of the carry player to really keep them in games, or are other people going to be able to step up and also be able to frag pretty well to where it doesn't have to all be him? But like I said, he's been kind of a big part of their success and at least one of their major upsets so far of 2015. The other person to talk about is Tarek. Now, Tarek has had this reputation of being like this really crazy aimer, from watching his stream, kind of like Shroud. A lot of people got this impression of Shroud being this crazy aimer and fragger mostly in the early days. Now, obviously, he's established himself with Cloud9. But in the earlier days, the reputation he gained for himself for his aiming and such came from his stream. And came from some of his performances that he was having in kind of the more amateur leagues of North America. And Tarek is a very similar person. He got out of this reputation of having some sick aim from his streaming and from playing against in 10-mans against and random pugs against some of the pro players in NA. And that's where he started to build this kind of reputation as being this fragger, this heavy aimer. And whenever he joined this team online, he was doing really, really well, doing good. Even at the Season 5 SEVO LAN event where they came in third place and they were struggling against iBuyPower, individually he was looking pretty good at this event as a fragger. But at X Games Aspen, he did his part on Dust 2 against LDLC, but he definitely wasn't like the star by any means. He was kind of getting having a tough time, so to speak. He was kind of being like this aggressive mid player on CT side, and he was getting shut down quite a lot on that. And just in general, he wasn't nearly as effective or having nearly as much of an impact as you would expect based on how he was doing for the team online against some of the top NA teams. And then at ClutchCon, once again, he just didn't look like the type of player that you were seeing from him in his online play. And this kind of goes into the whole inconsistency of the team. And part of that is Tarek just not maybe having as good of games as you would expect from him based on how he was doing prior to these big LANs. However, at the Katowice qualifiers, he looked very good. I think he was their top fragger for the whole event. He looked really good. So if Tarek can maintain this level of play that we saw at the Katowice qualifiers, which is the same level of play we're used to seeing from him against the top NA teams in some of these online cups and such. If he can have that level of play, this could be very good for CLG. It kind of gives them another guy next to Peter's op that they can rely on to produce. And so we'll just have to see if that works out or not. I mean, the whole team has been kind of inconsistent in their play, and Tarek has been one of the factors of this, though overall the whole team has had this issue. So we'll just have to see how Tarek can play at Katowice and going forward, if he can be that aimer, that heavy fragger guy that they sometimes rely on. I know Hayes is also moving into a more aggressive entry fragging position. He's probably one of the names on the team you would come up with whenever you're talking about their heavier hitters or some of their main fraggers. So we'll have to see how Hayes steps into this role. Now Cutler is like kind of their quiet assassin, in the sense that he's always like second or third place on the team in frags. Like the other guys like Peter or Tarek or Hayes might kind of interchange at who's top fragging or who's having the really big performance, but it always seems like Cutler is the guy that's quietly getting his couple of kills around and sitting at that number 2 or number 3 spot on the team. He's one of their more support players. He can also pick up the op if needed, though I think Tarek is kind of the second opper in many situations, especially on CT sides. But Cutler can also pick up the op. He was actually their opper for a time before they picked up Peter, and when JDM had left, and in other instances where they were rotating in and out oppers, he would kind of fill in that role, so he can help out there as well if need be. And he's a really good support player. I think he's one of their most consistent players, actually. He may not be like their top fragger or their heaviest hitter, but I think he's one of the most consistent performers on the team, and so that's kind of one of the things to look at on this team as well, his kind of consistent middle-of-the-pack performance on the team, usually contributing pretty well. So that's kind of some of the players and their roles and maybe some concerns we could have. As a team overall with the inconsistency issues, that's also like the biggest thing. We really don't know how good this team is, because they've had these big wins against elite level teams, but then they've had losses to teams right afterwards that you wouldn't think they would lose to after doing so well against the elite level teams. So there definitely is an overall inconsistency issue here. Part of the reason why this may be is, from watching their CT sides, sometimes they do have a trend, just from some of the North American teams that have played against them and talked about them, have said that they do sometimes maybe over-rotate on the CT side, and so sometimes they get caught for that, sometimes they don't. I know they're also very aggressive on their CT side, so Dust 2, for example, the map that they've won against elite level teams on here recently between Titan and LDLC, now EnvyUs, is that they're really aggressive on their CT side. They'll push Peter Cat with an op, and he'll take his picks in the lower B-tons, and he'll take his picks at mid and then kind of fall back. You'll see Tarek sometimes press double doors and either just work to that Xbox to peek lower B, or sometimes he'll just straight up try to walk up and try to start attacking the back of Catwalk or Subway or Green Box. Or you'll see rounds where Hayes and company will kind of just push B tunnels and try to get information upper B, and maybe get some kills and fall back, or just press through tons if they don't meet any resistance and try to work into lower tons and start getting control of mid. And, that they're known to, Pete will obviously get pit position at long A and kind of be aggressive there as well. Maybe press someone on the other side of blue, bin on the other side of the long doors, and try to get, maybe not like an aggressive push through long, but just a little bit more of an upfront position defensively. And sometimes this works wonders for them. They're very dynamic in it. They'll change it up. It's not like they push B tunnels every round. It's not like they press Peter with the op cat every round. They do change it up, but in some instances it works out really well for them, and they have a really good CT side and things look sharp. But in other instances, they get caught on their aggression. Teams playing a bit more passive in the B tons back towards T-spawn waiting for a push, or people who are kind of aware of the cat push and are just kind of sitting back and waiting for it, or people who are just kind of watching mid for a very long time and can catch Tarek, trying to slip in and out of the Xbox. Sometimes they get caught, and so this can really hurt their team, and it can lead to some inconsistencies in their performances. And that's just one map as an example. And on their T sides, against teams that they scout a lot, for example, when they scouted at LDLC for Aspen, yeah, they did read the CT side very well. They had very good scouting, and so their executions were actually very good, and obviously Peter's op a big part of things, but in general, they were very aware. They were pre-aiming the right spots. They had good nade placement. They had good timings on their execution. So against teams they scout for, their T side seemed to reflect that. But there is this issue against teams that they don't take as seriously or whatnot, that they don't scout well enough, or they're not prepared for well enough, and their T sides really crumble. Look at their T side on Cash against Liquid at Aspen. They just completely fumbled, and Cash is usually generally a good map for them. It's not like their best map by any means. Their best map's probably Dust 2, but Cash is still a very strong map for them. And to not come up with anything on T side there on Cash against Liquid is kind of reflective of either maybe not taking Liquid seriously enough, or inconsistencies on their T side. You know, sometimes when they really have good information, they can execute really well, but in situations where they're kind of in the blind and reading their opponent, they definitely struggle to find something that works. So essentially what I'm concluding is that CLG has definitely, over the years, as Mousepaz with some of their oldest members, has definitely slowly but surely become a better team in the NA scene, and that's why you're seeing them qualifying for events like X Games Aspens from the online qualifier, and now representing NA overseas in a major. But there's definitely still some issues with roles on the team, apparently shifting in-game leader. That's, you know, have to see how that goes. It seems kind of odd to me, but maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. You know, you have some other inconsistencies with individual performances on that team. Tarek was one of the names I brought up. Looked really good at Katowice qualifiers, but looked poor in some of the NA lands he was at. So can he maintain that level we saw at the qualifiers and what we see from him in a lot of his online cup play? And then just in general inconsistencies in their performances overall, whenever they're beating top teams, but then losing to teams that you would think they should be able to beat if they are beating these top teams. So definitely some inconsistency issues there, but they have shown progress, and they do seem to be slowly still improving. So with that being said, how will they do at Katowice? I'm not really sure. It depends on their group. And it just also depends on how they are that day, because we have seen them get these one-off best-of-1 wins to advance from, or to make an effort to advance from a group like they did at Aspen. So if they can do that again, like a one-off best-of-1 win against like a Titan, like they did at the qualifiers, or like an EnvyUs like they did at Aspen, if they can manage that in group play of Katowice, the main event, then yeah, surely they can maybe make it out of group play. As far as in bracket play against another top-level team from the world in a best-of-3, I don't like their chances just yet. I think they still have some work to do. But we'll just have to see how it goes. And then going forward, I think this could be a good team for NA. This could be one of those teams that kind of start filling that void left behind by teams that have gone, like iBuyPower and Torqued, and some of the talent that's been erased from the scene. This could be one of those teams that step in to fill that. And they definitely do have some talent on that team that can step in and fill that. But we'll just have to see if they can overcome some of these inconsistency issues, and whether or not they can get these roles better solidified and get the personnel where they need to be to perform. And that's where I'll leave it with CLG. Definitely be on the lookout for more videos to come, though. I plan on doing a video about Liquid here soon, as well as some of the other NA teams and players. And then I'll just maybe continue my vlog series, you know, just running as I come up with topics that I think are relevant. But I hope you enjoyed this, and just be on the lookout for more. Thanks.